And then where does the funding reside for like research like this? Because it seems that in the past decade, the past 2 decades or so, there's been a large shift with NASA and other space agencies in terms of focusing our attention on climate change as well as like our push towards the moon and Mars. And so um, it seems that like space science is, as I mentioned like in the beginning of the podcast, I think a lot of people initially just think of the aurora, and maybe they think of something they saw in the news or some History Channel show before about the possibility of a solar storm and it wreaking havoc on Earth and technology. Kind of where do you what's been like the progress in terms of funding? Like, is there enough public attention on things like this and your research and similar space weather pursuits?
Yep. So with the creation of Homeland Security, one of the things that the federal government did was to try to identify risks. And so there, come from chemical plants to homegrown terrorism. And so there's a long list of risks. And as I mentioned, pandemics and space weather are two of the really big ones. And so our senator in Michigan, Gary Peters, has led an effort to get legislation passed to have coordination and increased funding for space weather, both the research as well as the operations, trying to predict it. And when you think of in the federal government, who uses space, it's essentially everybody. And so part of the issue is trying to get that coordination between NASA and NOAA and all of the DoD intelligence community folks to try to understand what's going on, be able to predict it, try to, what type of design should we have for a space vehicle that will increase its life. And then with the advent of the commercial space industry really taking off, there's a lot of billionaires, the Jeff Bezoses and Elon Musks and those Virgin Galactic type of folks are investing a lot of money, both for tourism, exploration, Earth observing planet labs, all types of folks that are going into space. So more and more people are investing and trying to understand how to operate and mitigate issues due to space weather. But NASA is not the largest space agency in the federal government. There are other agencies in the DoD and intelligence community that have more space assets.
Yeah. And we thought that an interesting last question for you, because we've been talking for about an hour, would be, what do you think is the most exciting thing in your field that's happening or that's going to happen, and what are your hopes for the future of the field of space weather?
So for space weather, there's a couple of things that couple together that's very cool. As I mentioned, Bell's law, where things are getting smaller and smaller, and you know about Moore's law as the capability. We're getting to the point probably in that next decade where we're going to have not only the capability of making multi-point observations globally on the ground and in space. So we have these constellations or dense arrays of instrumentation. We're also going to have the capability to actually analyze that data with physics-based models, many of them developed here at University of Michigan. There's a space weather modeling framework, which is actually used by NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center as the community model to make forecasts.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to this podcast episode. This is Michael.
This is Sam.
This is Tommy.
And this is Joe.
If you're listening to this on YouTube, make sure to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, make sure to leave a review. All of the show notes can be found either in the description below or on our website. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next week with more Everything Astronomy.